Obviously, the big news right now is the Inflation Reduction Act, previously known as Build Back Better. They were able to pass something, which I think on some level is kind of surprising after the way that the last year or so has gone when these negotiations began. But it's obviously grossly inadequate. It's nothing close to what we need to combat the climate issues. It's nothing close to what we need to create a more equitable society. It's not even really a strong step in the right direction. It potentially could maybe reduce emissions a little bit, but it's also got massive handouts to the fucking oil industry and massive handouts to private equity. So it's what you get in Washington D.C. It's what you get when you have Democrats negotiating on your behalf, and yet they're out calling it historic, and they're probably right because of how pathetic the context is, right? It is historic when you compare it to the absolutely nothing that we have ever done on the climate. Um, you know, spending $3.50 would have probably been historic by our country's standards. So, but this bill is grossly inadequate, and I have quite a few things I want to say about quite a few different angles on this one. I'm sure many of you have been following this news over the last couple of days, so please bear with me if I'm going over things that you already are aware of. But I'm going to start with the climate portion of the bill, and then we're going to work into some of the other aspects of the bill as well, and talk about the role that various senators played and how the media is treating them and those kinds of things. So, but like I said, I want to start with the climate portion. So we're going to show you guys here some of the realities of the bill. This is shared by Holding Biden Accountable. Wonderful follow on Twitter if you are not following them at Waiting on Biden. They say this is the climate bill they're celebrating, by the way. Under the bill, the Interior Department would be required to offer up at least 2 million acres of federal land and 60 million acres of offshore acreage to oil and gas producers every year for the next decade. If they fall short, they wouldn't be able to advance some permitting aspects of the wind and solar projects on federal land. So if you guys don't understand what that's saying, they're basically saying that the good things in the bill are conditioned on doing bad things first. Massive drilling projects, 60 million acres a year, you guys. My goodness, fucking gracious. Biden also slipped into this. Some of you may remember the story where he was trying to lease a whole bunch of land in the Gulf, and a court struck him down and basically said that he hadn't properly considered all of the climate implications of doing so. He managed to slip that into this bill as well. So all sorts of goodies for the oil and gas industry, just what you want in your climate bill, right? This article also says it would also derive. It would also revive Biden's outrageous failed attempt to carry out the largest oil and gas lease sale in the country's history, which a judge had blocked earlier this year for failing to properly account for the disastrous climate impact. Obviously, that's what I just said. I forgot that was in this article. And carrying on, it's a renewable energy revolution on top of a fossil fuel build out, says Noel. I don't know who Noel is, but isn't that classic DC talk right there? Others were less polite, calling the proposed pairing deranged and madness. Brett Hartle, government affairs director at the CBD, called it a climate suicide pact. It's not hard to see why. Not long after the bill's announcement, the unassociated press investigation was published, revealing that hundreds of lease sites in the Permian Basin alone are every hour leaking between hundreds and thousands of kilograms worth of methane, a greenhouse gas dozens of times more planet boiling than carbon dioxide, and that doesn't even count the emissions from drilling, extracting, and eventually burning the fuel within. Completely gone, too, is any funding whatsoever for high-speed rail and public transit, even as the United States car-heavy transportation system is its single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, with more than 80% of those coming from, and then the article cuts off there. I tried to find this article, you guys, so I could give you a little bit more context, but I just couldn't find it, so I figured it's better to show the clips than nothing. But you can see there just a little slice of how this is not exactly the historic, robust, transformative bill that the Democrats would have you believe. Even quite frankly, you guys, and I went into this at length at the time, even when it was first proposed, a little over a year ago, the original Build Back Better bill, it was so much better than it currently is now, but it was still grossly inadequate. It's like at every step On the left, we've been like, that's not close to enough. And then they're like, watch me gut it more. Watch me throw in more handouts to oil and gas and private equity, massive corporations. You know, so just so that anyone, just to clear up any confusion about what exactly this bill is. I mean, guys, I hope like hell that it is a net positive on the climate, even if it's not much. I hope like hell that's the case, but it's kind of hard to tell at this point if it is, and if so, to what extent it is. And that's not exactly what you want when we have an existential crisis on our hands, right? To have to sit here and go, I can't really tell if it's good or bad. That's not nearly close to transformative enough. It should be right in front of your face obvious that the bill is good. If to meet the moment right now, it would need to be right in your face obvious that this bill is good. And the fact that there is so much ambiguity about it is deeply, deeply concerning, even if it ends up having a net positive impact. So, this is, we talk about the climate every week, at least I try to. I talk about how I think this is not talked about enough or given enough attention, and what we got here is grossly inadequate. Grossly inadequate. We need to spend trillions over the next handful of years, and what we're getting is, $400 billion over a decade or something like that. And that's not even including all of the negative climate impacts that we just kind of went into a little bit. Another provision that was up for debate here was a cap on insulin prices. And it's a little bit complicated how that ended up going. It partly went through, but not nearly in the fashion that we needed it to. I have a tweet here from Andrew Perez to talk about some of the procedural things as to why it did not go through. It's the Parliamentarian. Again, you guys, they're falling back on the powerless, unelected advisor. We can't do things because of the person that works for us. Sorry. This, again, is Andrew Perez, who's with Lever News. If you're not following Andrew, I encourage you. Read the 35 a month insulin cap a teeny bit differently. It could have taken 60 votes to exclude the measure instead of needing 60 votes to include the measure. All they had to do was ignore the Parliamentarian instead of giving her, treating her like a deity. So this is a point, you guys, I've seen from all the centrists, like, well, we just don't have the votes, as though that's an argument, right? Well, you would have had the votes if you just overrode a powerless advisor who works for you. So when we say the Democrats are feckless and unwilling to follow through on their promises, that is what we mean. I don't think it's honestly, you guys, it's like fucking insulting that the centrists treat us like we're 6 years old. Well, can you count to 50? It's insulting, as though we don't understand what the current count in the Senate is. Of course we understand that. Our complaint is with how the Democrats approach these things. Our complaint is with the unwillingness to use the bully pulpit. Our complaint is with the unwillingness to use the power that you have to try to force things, or at the very least to expose who is the problem, right? And in this case, they could have simply done something procedurally different, and they would have gotten a different result, and they know that. They chose to do the wrong thing. But meanwhile, they'll go out and they'll tell you that they all support this. Every single member of the caucus supports the thing they just voted against. And we're all supposed to believe it. So once again, falling back on the Parliamentarian here. We got this with the $15 minimum wage. Now we also got it with the insulin cap. As I said, this did partially go through. The Parliamentarian basically said you cannot apply it to private insurance. You can't apply it to Medicare. She said the same thing about other things. So, and to those, just to those that are questioning, like to those who would say, well, it would be uncouth to overrule the Parliamentarian. That's why they're there. We follow law and order in this party. All those kind of arguments. That is why Democrats lose. That is why. You know what George W. Bush and the Republicans did in the early 2000s when they were trying to pass the Bush tax cuts by reconciliation and the Parliamentarian said no? They fired him and replaced him with someone who would do it. That is politics. You don't just fucking cower to a powerless advisor unless you don't actually want to do the thing that you're trying to convince the public you want to do. And that is the case with Democrats, very obviously. Very obviously. They do not want to do the things that they tell you they want to do, or else they would do them. I know, it's wild logic, right? Crazy. People in D.C., their heads are blowing up if they're watching this. But do not fall for the whole, it was the parliamentarian. We just can't do the things that we're elected to do when we're in power. We just can't do it. It's amazing, by the way, you guys, just as a side point, it is amazing how many people who have seriously have a voice, have a following, right, whatever, on politics. It's amazing how many of them have been completely and thoroughly convinced that members of Congress have no power. It's utterly incredible, you guys. Utterly incredible. Well, we just can't do it because I counted and the numbers say. No, force them. Force them. That's how change is done. That's how change is achieved. Nothing of consequence has ever been achieved by just electing the right people. You're always going to have to twist some wrists and force people to do what you want. That is what the bully pulpit is for. So, anyway, I'm so tired of this party hiding behind, other people and other actors, or hiding behind the rotating villain when their actions betray what they're claiming here. They do not want to do the things that they are refusing to do while in power. Do not continue to fall for this. We need 99 Senate seats before we can achieve anything. You just got to elect more Democrats. How many is it going to take, you guys? Barack Obama had 60. He had a super majority. He had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and a massive majority in the House. And he did fuck all. He gave us Republican health care and backed off of all of his other tepidly progressive promises. How much does it going to take? Do you need 64? How many senators until you'll actually do something, Democrats? And I think even if you had 64, I think what would happen is you would have 14 rotating villains. That is how obvious it is that this party is not serious about what it talks about during election season. Chuck Schumer also had a hand in this, obviously. I have an article here I want to show you guys that is in The Lever. It is by David Sirota. Schumer lets aide kill key drug price reforms. The decision comes as Schumer is now the Senate's #2 recipient of pharmaceutical industry campaign cash. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer let a U.S. Senate advisor kill key parts of Democrats' promised drug pricing legislation, as Schumer has become the Senate's second largest recipient of pharmaceutical industry cash. On Saturday, the Senate's parliamentary advisor, Elizabeth McDonough, who Schumer can remove, as I just mentioned, issued a non-binding advisory opinion saying Democrats should remove provisions in their spending bill that would punish drug makers for inflating their prices for patients and private health insurance plans. The provision could have saved $40 billion, according to one estimate. The exclusion of the private insurance price limits means there is little left that will reduce costs for the vast majority of Americans who receive health insurance through their private sector employer, reported Politico. McDonough also advised Democrats against including a provision in their legislation to cap out-of-pocket insulin costs at $35 a month for people on private insurance plans. Democrats ultimately held a failed vote to overrule her on the insulin cap. Democrats' legislation does still allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices for the first time, but only on 10 drugs by 2026, and eventually 20 drugs per year. Removing the inflation cap will substantially limit protections for patients on private health insurance plans. Medicare patients will benefit from the $35 cap on out-of-pocket insulin costs, but patients on private insurance plans will not. Taken together, Democrats' signature drug pricing measure is now a shell of the proposal that lawmakers debated for much of last year, and far weaker than the compromise deal negotiated by the party's drug industry allies. Everything Democrats do, you guys, it's anytime they want to address a issue, it's like they are putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound, and then they want us to celebrate. What was it? 10 drugs by 2026? 10 drugs? I mean, Real news consistently reads like the fucking Onion. And of course, Schumer being the number 2 recipient of Big Pharma cash is no coincidence there, if you're wondering why he refused to actually use the power he has as majority leader of the fucking Senate. Groveling to a powerless advisor. And by the way, you guys, I'm phrasing this wrong. I'm framing this whole thing incorrectly. She's there because she's doing this. So I just want to be clear. The Democrats want her to tell them no so that they have an excuse not to do these things. That is the simple reality. That is what buying off Chuck Schumer does for these pharma companies. She is literally, he gets to control who the parliamentarian is. So she's in that role because she consistently rules this way and gives the Democrats an excuse to not do a goddamn fucking thing. And now, as far as I want to talk a little bit about sort of the perception of individuals involved in the negotiation. So I have a tweet here to start things off. This is by Ben Spielberg. Democratic senators are more united in telling Bernie Sanders that he needs to let go of dental and hearing benefits for seniors than they ever were in telling Joe Manchin he needs to drop goodies for oil companies or accept cash payments for families with children. So just to be really clear, you guys, and this to me is like, you know, I very much appreciate a lot of the things that Bernie has done in recent days to try to highlight the inadequacies of this bill and at least propose amendments to the bill, even if he knew they were going to fail. But this is where the reason that Manchin is treated differently than Bernie in the press, and the reason that Manchin is taken seriously by leadership when they're negotiating these bills is because leadership knows Manchin actually will vote no. He means business. He could give a flying fuck about the environment or about poor and working class people. He does not care one bit about them. What he cares about is serving his donors and his class. That's it. So Manchin has no problem tanking a bill, even if it means bad PR. That is why he's treated differently by the media, and that is why negotiators take him seriously. And that is why Bernie Sanders is, quite frankly, treated like a laughingstock in the press and not taken seriously during negotiations. Because they knew all along he was going to vote yes anyway. And at some point, you guys, like, I get it. It can be very difficult to be the one that tanks a bill that you've been fighting for so long. I get it. Because there are some good things in this bill that Bernie has been fighting for. So it can be difficult to be the guy that's like, I'm going to put my foot down unless you improve this thing. But until a progressive is willing to do that, we are going to continue to be treated like doormats by leadership in the party, by the media, by all of those who control the narratives in D.C. and around the country. It's shameful, you guys. I'm going to get into some of that. It's shameful the way that Bernie Sanders has been treated compared to Manchin and Sinema, and Schumer and all the others, and the corporatists who like to hide behind Manchin and Sinema. It's shameful, and it's hypocritical, and I mean, it's all of the above. But if Bernie wants to be taken seriously in these moments, what he needed to do was somewhere along the way actually refuse to vote for something that needs his vote to pass. That's the other key part of this, you guys. It's one thing to be the one person to vote against a bill. Like sometimes Bernie and Rand Paul are the only two to vote against like a military spending bill or something like that. That really means nothing because it doesn't stop the bill from passing. So no one actually cares. If Bernie in this case, because it was 50-50, if Bernie in this case was willing to say, just like Manchin, I will vote no if I don't get my way, well, then you guys think about what that does for the rhetoric, right? Of course, the mainstream press would vilify Bernie for that. But then when Manchin goes to do his bullshit and when Sinema goes to give goodies to the private equity firms, there would at least be this dynamic of that of, oh, it's not going to pass now. Bernie's not going to let it pass if you do that. So there would conceivably be the same pressure that's on Bernie right now on them too. Because what people are saying to Bernie is what you're asking to be put into the bill, Joe Manchin's not going to go for it. That's what people are worried about with Bernie's proposals. And I'm not talking about the elected Democrats, you guys. They're just lying. Okay, a lot of them. They're just lying. I'm talking about the actual people, the human beings, the voters. They're criticizing Bernie right now because they think that was going to tank the bill. They only think that was going to tank the bill because they know Manchin and Sinema will vote no. So again, if Bernie had demonstrated a willingness to put his foot down and say, I'm not voting for this because it's not good enough, if somewhere along the way he had done that where that was a consequential vote, where he alone tanked a bill, then they would have been forced to listen to him here. Bernie could have gone to Joe Biden and said, guess what, Joe? Your agenda is not going to get through right before the midterms. Everyone's going to deem you a catastrophic failure right before the midterms unless you get the party to go along with these provisions. He would have actually had power. Of course, you guys, I am not saying that given that scenario, we would have gotten a wonderful and robust and comprehensive bill. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is at least a few of those amendments might have gone through, right? And that's part of the problem with progressives is that they're so, because we're constantly so vilified in the press and in these mainstream circles, we're so terrified of being the bad guy. Whereas when Joe Manchin's the bad guy, they all compliment him and talk about how serious and reasonable and moderate he is and how he knows how to get things done and he knows how to negotiate and all this stuff, right? So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents on that. And speaking of Joe Manchin, I have just a short little thing to show you guys here. Manchin, I was ostracized and victimized after nuking Build Back Better. So that's, I mean, on one hand, that's just hilarious. Oh, you poor little baby. Did you have to face consequences for your actions? Oh, you took some money to be the rotating villain and now you're vilified. Oh, you poor little baby. You know, it's kind of funny. But on the other hand, there actually has been a lot of reporting that the reason anything happened here at all is because Manchin wanted to prove his critics wrong. That is pressure working, you guys. That's pressure working. That's not a win for Manchin. That's, we turned you into a puppet by criticizing you, bud. So that's an example of why strong political pressure is a necessary and positive thing, you guys. And I'm not talking about like I'm talking about actually the people who took kayaks out to Manchin's yacht and chastised him. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We need to not give these politicians a moment of peace while they continue to disregard us and disregard the needs of the planet and endlessly serve the wealthy and the corporate class and the banks and the military contractors and the oil companies and on and on and on. If this is how they're going to do their business, they don't deserve a moment's peace, and we shouldn't give it to them. And Manchin here sort of unwittingly admitting that pressure very much worked. Again, you guys, I don't want to overstate it. This bill is garbage. It's a trash bill. I'm just making a broader point about strategizing and getting things done, right? Pressuring these people, being right up in their face and not leaving them alone is an effective strategy. And it should be one of the tools that we are going to on the left to try to affect some sort of change. So we'll keep up, obviously, on things as they develop about that bill. The other thing that I wanted to note right off the jump, it is very unlikely to actually impact inflation, and the fact that it is seeking to cut into the deficit is not a positive, like that. People treat that like a notch on this bill's feather. It's not. It's the opposite. That is deemed to be inherently virtuous in this country. cutting into debts and deficits. And we talk all the time about modern monetary theory and how that sort of elucidates for us that dynamic that we as a country seem to, the framing that we as a country seem to apply to public spending is completely backwards and incorrect. So, as far as inflation, we've also covered at length that a lot of what this inflation really boils down to is simple price gouging and market manipulation on behalf of major corporations. This doesn't do anything to combat that. So, the mainstream approach to inflation has been proven time and again not to work. You guys, I mean, Japan has been trying to create inflation for 20 fucking years by deficit spending, and they couldn't, right? There is no correlation between interest rates and inflation, but we raise interest rates when we see inflation. We do things that don't have any backing in evidence, and yet they seem to be consensus among the quote unquote experts. So the name of this bill, as often is the case in D.C., is completely misleading and disingenuous. The Inflation Reduction Act. It's like, they constantly do this. They'll name a bill that guts healthcare, like some healthcare bill, like that kind of thing. I mean, you can never take the names of these bills seriously, and I wanted to address that up front, too. This is not likely to actually help to combat inflation. So anyway, like I said, we'll keep up on any updates with that bill. It has passed the Senate. It looks like it's going to pass the House. So, but if things go awry or if there are more amendments made, we will cover that. And it looks like it effectively looks like the legislative portion of the first 2 years of the Biden administration has come to an end. And what do we get, guys? I mean, honestly, my expectations of Biden were like dog shit, and he still managed to disappoint me. That's impressive. That is impressive.